this is a joint work with Pontus, and it's going to talk about market power, growth, and inequality. So this is the motivation of the paper. So it's going to be essentially a theory paper, with motivated by some facts. Okay. So you know these facts. You all know these facts. This is US data. A lot of things happened in the 80s in the US, and many of us have worked in those years. Fundamental changes happened those years. So increasing markup, starting early 80s with increasing concentration. We know there's been a lot of work on this. Productivity slowdown. In this room, you know very well this fact, and increasing inequality. So this is wealth inequality. This is I plot the Gini in the top 10 share. But as you know, because we have worked on this, other measures of inequality of income, skill premium, residual inequality also exhibit similar patterns. But today we're gonna focus on wealth inequality. So we want to develop a framework that can link these facts together. But more precisely, we want to develop a framework that tries to analyze the impact of an increase in market power on firm innovation and growth and on the distribution of wealth. So in order to do that, we're going to set up a growth model where firms compete a la Cournot. So there's going to be endogenous markups. Is going to be innovation post-entry, and long run, so to improve productivity, and long run growth is going to be sustained by innovation and knowledge spillovers. The model is going to be, the market structure is going to be Cournot with free entry. On the household side, we're going to have two models. The first one is going to be the very standard, very simple capitalist and workers, where and we do this for analytical insights. Okay, and the second model is going to be the more quantitatively standard incomplete market model, a la Iagari, where you have no conditioned asset available, and there's going to be borrowing constraint and idiosyncratic employment risk. In the first type of model, the models are going to be they're going to be essentially telling you the same thing, and we write the same similar things, not exactly the same thing. We're going to write the simple model to get analytical insights. So in the simple model, let me see. Yes. So in the simple model, you essentially have capitalists that are the only agents that can access the financial markets. They can only capitalists can save, and workers are going to be hand to mouth. In the Iagari model, you're going to have everybody potentially working. By the way, in the two agent model, capitalists don't work. In the Iagari model, all agents can work and can potentially have access to the financial markets that can save. Okay, but depending on your wealth, you're going to see that they're going to save for different reasons. Versus intertemporal. So I'm going to do something risky. I'm going to. Before presenting the model, you have to bear with me a little bit. I just want to give you an overview of what I'm going to do, the key ideas behind the research setup and the results. So we're going to postulate, and we're going to discuss some data later on, that an increase in entry cost generates the increase in markups that we observe in the data. Okay? With Cournot competition, higher entry barriers, you're going to end up with a smaller number of firms and with higher markups. So this is the first fact. Okay? Now, how does this transmit to growth and wealth distribution? So with fewer firms, and I'm going to be very precise about this channel, the way so with fewer firms, you're going to get more concentration. And actually, this less innovation is actually not completely correct. You're going to get, in our model, less growth. It could be less growth with less innovation or less growth with more innovation. And the idea is that with fewer firms, knowledge spillovers that sustain long-run growth in this economy weaken. Because essentially, we assume that we learn from each other, okay? The less firms you have in your product line to learn from, the less productive you're going to be in your R&D activity, okay? Wealth inequality is going to increase. Why? Because these two, the number one and number two mechanisms are going to affect R minus G, okay? And wealth inequality in the class of models, but in a very large class of models, OLG models, model with random growth in general, random growth in general, and in this incomplete market models, is driven by the difference between R minus G and the movement in this difference. Okay, not just when the difference is should be clear. When the R minus G doesn't move, inequality doesn't move. Why? Okay, this is going to be the key insights of the paper. An increase in entry barrier is going to increase profit, markups, and profits. So in this economy, in the financial markets, you're going to have households supplying assets, supplying savings, and firms demand savings. When profits increase, the stock market value of the firm goes up, and the demand for asset goes up. So imagine now, it's not going to be literally like this in the simple model, but in the heterogeneous agent model, yes. Imagine now an interest rate set in financial markets where the asset supply is upward sloping and asset demand is downward sloping. Okay, when asset demand goes up because firms' profits have increased, so the value of the firms went up, you have a upward pressure on the interest rate. Okay, I already told you that through this mechanism linking concentration to the strength of spillover, growth goes down. Now, if R went up, G went down, so you have an increase in R minus G. Okay. Now, this happens. What I just told you, this type of asset market, okay, is this one, right? So this is the asset market of an Ayagari type of model, okay, where you have the supply of savings of assets, it's upward sloping. Okay, so this is stationary. So here you don't have simply R like the real interest rate, but you have R minus G because you stationary for the growth rate. So this is steady state. When the demand AD goes up because profits went up, you have an increase in R minus G. In the two-agent model, this doesn't happen in steady state because asset supply in steady state is equal rho. Okay, so in the two-agent model, this happens along the transition. Okay. Okay, so we established that when profits go up, there is an increase in asset demand, which increases R, and there's declining growth via the mechanism I explained, weaker spillovers that reduces G, and this pushes up. This is what I call the return gap, R minus G. Why is this return gap increasing inequality? Right? Because if there is an increase in the interest rate, think about it. Pietro is rich, I am poor. Interest rate goes up by 1%. This is going to rescale our wealth by 1%. The distance is not going to change between my wealth and Pietro's wealth. So it would be through this, proportional rescaling. First of all, if we all have wealth, and is our response to that increase in net saving, right? When I say net, because it also depends whether you work or not, right? Because remember that growth has gone down. And in this economy, as in most of the economies we work with, the wage growth is proportional to aggregate growth. So when aggregate growth goes down, also the wage growth goes down. So suppose that Pietro and I work both, but he's rich and poor. If we respond to this increase in R minus G proportionally, nothing is going to happen to our distance. But if we don't, things will change. So I'm going to use this fancy acronyms only a couple of times, okay? So I'm going to call TAG, two agents growth model, the capitalist and worker model, and I'm going to call HOG, the heterogeneous agents growth model. So in TAG, which is two agents, which is still a rep agent, okay? So R minus G in the long run is constant, along the transition changes. Pietro is the capitalist, is the only one who has wealth, okay? I cannot save. Then when R minus G goes up, our wealth is going to, so there the measure is going to be the wealth to income ratio. Wealth to income ratio is going to go up. Now, let's look at a model where both me and Pietro can save, okay? This is the HOG model, the Ayagari version. So I am poor. I'm very close to the borrowing constraint. In these models, if you're close to the borrowing constraint, you save more for precautionary reasons, right? You don't really care about the increase in the interest rate, so saving for intertemporal reasons. Because what you do, you just have to, hedge your bets and try to make it to not go bankrupt, essentially. Pietro is rich, so he does very far from default, okay, or from the borrowing constraints, or not being able to smooth consumption anymore. So he will enjoy the increase in the interest rate, okay? So this implies that we'll have an heterogeneous response of our saving decision to the increase in the return gap. Pietro is going to respond much more than me, and we're going to pull apart. Main message of the paper. Okay, so agents close to the constraint have a strong precautionary motives and a weak intertemporal motives. Okay, it's in the simple model, instead of saying that the workers or the poor have a weak intertemporal motive, I just shut down the motive altogether. But the sense is the same. In a way, it's like when you're very, very constrained, you don't really have an access to the stock market that makes you rich. Just give me a minute. I'll give you the literature that you all know, essentially, and then we can move to the model, or I can answer questions. So the facts are well known, okay? We try to put these facts together, okay? And especially we try to understand how market power affects growth and productivity and wealth inequality. So there is a large literature on the recent increase in inequality, in wealth inequality in the US. The literature focuses on taxation, wage inequality, portfolio heterogeneity in returns, that rich have access to a different type of financial market. And then there is this paper by Ben Moll that focuses on automation. Okay, we're going to study the impact on market power. Why? Because we thought that there is a direct relationship between market power and firms' profits and firm demand and firm values, and therefore the demand for assets. So now very well in this room that there is a long literature on competition and growth. There's been a bunch of papers recently trying to understand why market power has increased in the last 20, 30 years in the US with growth models. I'm sure that I'm missing some papers from Pietro, but I will go back and check. He writes more than I can read. So these models, there's 2 points here. So here to this literature, we add the heterogeneity on the agent side. And I will try to convince you that this is actually important, not just because both R and G will be endogenous, but because endogenous growth does something very particular and new to the transmission mechanism typical of these models that goes from R to wealth inequality. Probably in this room, nobody would be surprised that I think that endogenous growth is important in this set of models, but you would be surprised that nobody has done all, there are a couple of papers here and there. The literature that looks at wealth inequality never considers G. And when considers G, G is exogenous. Okay? On the market power and the competition and growth, we're going to give a perspective that is different from the papers that you see here. They all use one way to generate a positive link between competition and growth, which is the one that comes from the step-by-step models, so escape competition. We're gonna base our mechanism more on the insights that you can find from the IO paper and the early papers by Pietro, and especially his job market paper. And the beauty of this is going to be that we're going to write a simpler model than the a simpler and more general model than the step-by-step. So this is the model. Final good, continuous of varieties, industries. Within industries, you have N firms competing Cournot. They produce, each firm I, within industry J, produces with labor and technology Z. Firm is going to use labor to increase productivity Z, and kappa is an externality. Well, kappa is a function of the productivity of the firm itself. So it's internal to the firms. We learn from each other, but it's also external. So there is a part, capital Z, where firms learn from all other firms on that product market, on that industry, all other firms. So beta controls the strength of the externality. So this is going to be symmetric equilibrium. Firms are going to be all the same in each sector and also across sectors in terms of technology. They will solve this dynamic Cournot game. They choose the quantity and R&D labor in order to maximize revenues minus R&D costs. Okay, so the discount is the real interest rate, and delta is a debt shock. At rate delta, firms die. This is because we can have free entry, subject to the demand from the final good, the quantity constraint. So the quantity that each firm, I dropped I now, but Q is the single firm quantity, is going to sell on the market, adds to the quantity that the other firms are going to sell on the market. So here there is the strategic interaction, and this is the R&D technology. We're going to focus on that. The differential game is a complicated game. If you want to characterize it, you need to use Nash in OpenLoop. Otherwise, things get complicated. Symmetric equilibrium gives you that the wage is proportional to productivity and theta. Theta is the inverse of the markup. And so the markup is a function of the number of firms at the elasticity of substitution across varieties. Okay, within each product line, within each Cournot sector, these Cournot firms produce perfectly substitutable goods. It's a simplifying assumption. You can put another layer of a nested CS and nothing changes. You're going to get another parameters here. So when the number of firms goes down, theta goes down, and markup goes up, and the wage goes down. This is a typical functional income distribution. Okay, when profitability goes up, the wage goes down. So growth is proportional to the investment in innovation and to the spillover parameter. Okay, so essentially, with symmetric equilibrium, the total stock of ideas within each product line is going to be equal to the productivity of each firm is the same, times the number of firms, total productivity. So here my assumption is that, if we are these sectors where we do research, everybody does research, the more people I interact with in this room or in my university, the more productive I will be. Okay, so it's not a crazy assumption. And so you end up with a growth rate of productivity, which is proportional to the scale. The key scale here is going to be the firm size, labor per firm, and the number of firms. Okay, so you see immediately that this generates a link between competition and the strength of spillover. So this is the and R is R minus G, is our return gap. So the value of the firm is the net present value of profit. So this is going to be this is stationarized with the wage. Profit discounted by the death rate and R minus G. Okay. So if firms to enter each product line, they have to pay a fixed cost in terms of labor. And this is the stationarized free entry. The value of the firm is equal to the entry cost. Market clearing, labor is used for production, R&D, and entry. Okay, so this is the mass of entrance, and each period, this is the flow out. Okay, we're done. So given an interest rate, okay, the firm side of the model determines growth via the growth equation, free entry, and so the firm side is characterized by this equation: growth, free entry, and market clearing. So, and in three unknowns: growth, size, and the mass of firms. Now, what links household side and firm size of this economy is the interest rate. Okay, and we have two closures to determine the interest rate: the capitalist and workers, and incomplete markets. In the capitalist and workers, we have so capitalist consumption follows the typical order equation. In steady state, R minus G is equal to rho. Workers are hand to mouth, they consume wage, stationarized, their consumption is 1. Now, capitalist wealth is total firm value, okay? N times B. Free entry tells me that V, the value of the firm, is equal to the entry cost. Then you plug it in, you get, remember this stationarized, you get a measure of the wealth to income ratio, wealth to wage in this case. That is essentially equal to the total amount of resources devoted to the fixed cost. Okay? So what happens to this economy, to the wealth to income ratio, to the markup, and to growth when I increase phi? We can prove that an increase in the fixed cost reduces the number of firms, and if the spillover parameter is very strong, okay, these are sufficient conditions, they're not necessary, and the elasticity of N to phi is not too big, it will reduce growth and increase the wealth to wage ratio. So this is a decomposition of the two key effects. So when I increase the fixed cost of entry, the entry cost, there's going to be there's no, you don't need any condition to prove that the number of firms will shrink, okay? And then so L per firms, so firm size is going to go up. This is good for growth, okay? So this is a negative relationship between competition and growth, and a positive relationship between market power and growth. Do you see my cursor? Yeah. So now, if this, so but I told you that there is this spillover effect that works the other way around. Now, with less people, the market is more concentrated, there is less flow of ideas. We we become less productive in R&D because there is less knowledge diffusion, there's less spillovers. Okay, so this creates a positive relationship between competition and growth, and a negative relationship between market power and growth. Here, for the way we have modeled this, okay, there is also a G effect that, again, implies that competition is good for growth. When you increase the fixed cost, there is more resources, more labor resources used for entry, and less available for production and innovation. Okay, but the key features is market size versus spillover. Okay. So I think, you know, and then I love, you know, love to hear your thoughts about this, and you know, this like the only place where I found this in the literature.
Giammario, can I ask a clarification? Can I ask a clarification question on this mechanism of spillovers versus size effect?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that if this spillover effect is strong enough to compensate the size effect that would come from a lower entry, then you have this positive effect on growth. But I was wondering the relationship between the beta and the appropriability of knowledge of the firm, if there is also there a trade-off, that is, if a higher beta is also associated with a weaker appropriability of the investment of the firm, private appropriability, or if this beta, the greater it is, the better in a way.
No, it is true. No? Maurizio, it's true what you say. It's here. Yeah? So this is your own, how much you learn from your own technology.
But if beta is equal to 1, that's going to be 0, right? 1.
Yeah. So it's going to be fully public. Yeah. So that's it. But you know what I was trying to discuss here is that, so there is this mechanism, like, you know, he doesn't speak too much about this inverted competition and growth we have here, but it's Pietro had seen this in a different ways, but some many years ago, and you know, there is one other way in endogenous growth models to generate a positive ratio between competition and growth is the step-by-step story, which, you know, I used. Many of you probably have used as well. It is a bit of a more specific model, a more special model, because it becomes a duopoly model, right? And the entries, you know, I tried and I'm still trying. It's not complicated it's not easy to accommodate entry. This is a quite natural way to do it. Obviously, if you buy this assumption, but I tried to. Obviously, we haven't done any empirics on this, but it seems that, at least from a theoretical point of view, it's a quite plausible assumption that we learn from each other. And the more we are, the more we learn. So now, you know, one objection to this story is, okay, but what if, you know, the shakeout, okay, generates its selection? So, you know, only the best stays in the room, right? And so then we can learn, if there is firm heterogeneity, if the best stay in the room, we can learn the average, you know, average productivity goes up and average learning goes up. It's possible, okay? This would be inconsistent with the aggregate evidence that there is a productivity slowdown, okay? And by the way, I will show you that this mechanism is going to be, the predictions are going to be consistent to outcomes where you see an increase in innovation effort and a reduction in productivity growth. Okay, which is consistent with this idea it's harder to find story of empirical evidence of Bloom, Varin, and Chad Jones, right? Because if concentration reduces the efficiency of R&D, then, you know, you can have an increased number of R&D workers and a reduction in their productivity and innovation efficiency. So this is mainly a paper about inequality, but I, especially in this room, and especially because I found this model is very, very intuitive, very easy to work compared to the alternative, I want to highlight. Okay. So this is what we do here. We take so the full model and the simple model have a set of common parameters, and taking the common parameters from the full model, and I'm using just to simulate. So I gave you all the results in closed form, but this is so here I'm going to increase the fixed cost, this proportional increase, in order to reproduce the entire increase in the markup we see in the data, and then I show you what the model does. Growth goes down, number of firms goes down, wealth to income and wealth to wage ratio goes up. You see here R&D research go up and then down. So there are parts of the space, of the fixed cost space, where you're going to see an increase in research and reduction in growth, and this is the increase in firm size that speaks to the mechanism of firm size. Okay, now, so inequality, I said, is driven by the return gap, right? The return gap here, this is steady state, is fixed, is raw. Euler equation. This is a Repage model. So in the capitalists don't have access to capitalists have access to the asset market. So if R increases, it's going to benefit them by construction, and workers will not be benefited because they don't have access to financial market, and they have the only income source is wages, which is going to be proportional to G, right, to the growth rate to productivity and the growth rate of productivity. So they're going to lose. But to see this in the Repage model, you need to go out of steady state, because in the long run, R minus G doesn't move there. Okay, so what happens to the value of an asset? So suppose that we are in BGP at time 0, okay? So, and you reach the new BGP at time 1, okay? This is going to be the evolution of the assets. So this is going to tell you that wealth inequality, remember that this is the wealth to wage ratio, is going to increase permanently for any departure, temporary departure of R minus G above rho. Okay. And this is the simulation. So R minus G goes up after we increase market power, and then comes down to rho. Growth goes down, 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 and then there is a comeback, but it's in the long run is lower than where we started. Okay, the real rate. Okay, you can't really see it here. It goes up and then it goes down, 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 and it goes down a bit more than when it started, right? Because if R minus G is equal to rho in the long run, and G is lower, then R is low. So the real rate goes down, and the wealth to income ratio goes up. So what happened here is that, again, the mechanism, higher entry cost lead to less entry, increase in markups, increase asset demand. Along the transition, there is this upward pressure to the interest rate, okay? So R goes up, G goes down, R minus G goes up, okay? Workers are worse off because G goes down. They can't enjoy a higher interest rate on the market. They can't respond in terms of saving. Capitalist response. There's going to be more accumulation, more inequality. Now, a key point. I told you that wealth inequality went up, and the real interest rate went down in the long run. So this is an economy that tells you that inequality has increased even if R has gone down. And R has gone down because G has gone down. And here is the beauty of using endogenous growth in this very, very popular set of literature. Well, this is a simple model, but you're going to see also in the incomplete market model, which is gigantic literature, we're going to find the same thing. What happened? So, okay. So growth goes down. Okay. So there is this increase in the demand of assets, which increases the interest rate. Growth goes down because of market power. So households see this decrease in growth in the future. What do? To smooth, okay, they save more. And so they increase the supply of assets. The supply increases and the interest rate starts to come down. And in this model, has to come down to the level of G, because Euler equation holds. Then R, at the end of the adjustment period, is going to be lower, even if inequality is going to be high. So this feedback from growth to the interest rate is something that you will never get if you do this with the model without endogenous. Okay, so why is this important? It is important because if you write, so for example, if you think about the paper by Ben Moll, so the paper is the following: increasing automation, increasing the demand for capital, which is complementary to automation, increasing the return on asset, increasing wealth inequality. Then they run against the evidence that the economy has gone to the zero lower bound in this period. The interest rate, the real rate, has gone down. Then, in the revised version, they start saying, oh, but assets are different. But, the power of introducing endogenous growth is that you can get increasing wealth inequality even with a declining interest rate because of the interaction with growth. Any questions so far? Now I can pause for a minute and then go to the.
Can you remind me what eta is in that equation? I forgot.
So eta is the production technology. Is the curvature? Is this curvature here?
Okay.
In relation to your stylized facts that you opened with, what we see is the number of firms is increasing in practice, right? It's just the entry rate is decreasing empirically. Can you tweak the model in a sense that the number of firms increases, but the entry rate slows down? Because that would match the facts, right?
Which facts are you referring to?
US firm dynamics or firm numbers.
Okay. I haven't checked that. I'll have to think about it. Also, because this is a world of innovating firms, so I would have to, you'll have to look at data where firms are innovating and if you have less or more. But it's something actually to look at. Yeah. So we might make this model a bit more quantitative. But our main target here is to highlight, it's a theory, okay, to highlight the theoretical channels, which we think they're quite new. Okay, so now all agents, so we generalize, all agents save and accumulate and work. Markets are incomplete. There's going to be an insurable income risk that generates heterogeneous households.
Sorry.
And this is.
Oh, sorry. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption.
No problem.
So, yeah, here you have this effect from the entry cost to inequality via the growth rate. So, but here there are two effects, right? Entry cost could have a positive or negative effect on the growth rate, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in order for you to get to the inequality result, you need this effect to be negative. You need the growth effect of entry cost to be negative. But in theory, even using your own theoretical model, if the positive effect prevails, then you will get an opposite implications on the inequality. Am I understanding the model correctly?
I'm not sure because we'll have to see what happened to R minus G. Because this feedback is powerful, right? So if G goes up,
Yep.
then I'm going to save less for intertemporal reason. So the supply is going to move.
Okay.
It's going to push R up. So you need to see what happens to R minus G. In this model, in the simple model along the transition,
Yep.
So in the other model, it's going to be also in steady state. Because in that model, remember that model I'm going to present now is a model where there is no rep agent anymore. So the supply of savings is actually upward sloping.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it would help you to explore all the possibility so that you know how the different effects operate within the model.
It could be. So the reason why we took it like this on purpose, because we wanted to show that, this is the model that matches the facts.
Okay.
You know, but I show you all the components.
Okay.
1 second, I need to turn off the heater that's too hot.
All right.
Okay, so here we're going to get a more realistic wealth distribution. Okay, so we're not going to get but the cool thing is that the firm problem is going to be identical. We just need to find a different determination of the interest rate. So we keep working in continuous time. This is the stationarized HAB value of the firm. This is the HAB of households. Consumption, continuation value. So here we have S is a set of exogenous states. Lambda is the Poisson transition between states. So this, it's a bit technical, is the excludes essentially rule out borrowing. So it's the borrowing constraint. So we're going to use 6 states, okay, which is in this literature is very little. So we add. So as you know, in these models there is a problem that the rich don't save enough, right? So you can't match the wealth distribution. So one trick is the Crusello-Smith trick that you assume that there is heterogeneity. There is a shock in patients. So we're gonna have not only 2 types of income level. So there is a shock. You can be employed or unemployed. Employed means you're gonna get the full salary. Unemployed, you're gonna get a salary cut. There's no proper unemployment here. And then there's 3 levels of patients of the discount: low, medium, and high. Okay. So this really does nothing to the mechanism. It just allows us to boost up the wealth distribution. And so the model admits a stationary concessional distribution of assets over state. So you solve the HAB, you're going to get a policy function in terms of consumption and savings that maps out this Kolmogorov forward equation and for a low motion of the distribution. Okay, in steady state, distribution is invariant, and from this invariant distribution, you're going to be able to compute the asset supply. Okay, the asset demand comes from the growth model. Okay, is again the total value of firms, which is the total value of the free entry cost. You put them together, and you're going to determine in steady state the R minus G, the return gap. Okay, so we calibrated this model. We get the spillover parameters from Bloom et al. This is the externality paper, Bloom, Varinen, and Schenkman. Then we internally calibrate R&D productivity, the technology curvature that Pietro was asking about, the fixed cost, the arrival rate, the key arrival rates, employment, unemployment, and the switch between the patient types, and this is the patient gap, the difference between patient and inpatient. We match markup, target markup, TFP average markup, obviously, TFP growth rate, R&D or GDP, unemployment rate, duration, and then the inequality target is the top 10% wealth share. Okay, the model, although we added the Crusella-Smith trick, usually it's not enough. You need to add other bells and whistles in this literature. We prefer not to blur the framework further. It cannot generate the American Gini. We generate a 0.66 Gini, and America is a point. Angus?
I just want to clarify, you have unemployment here. So the unemployed worker
No. This is it's the typical way to do it. It's going to be, it's going to be essentially factually the same as having unemployment, but we don't have unemployment. It's just the shocks is going to be random, and instead of saying, okay, you're going to get an unemployment benefits, we assume that you're going to get a pay cut. Okay.
Okay, so it's a productivity shock. So it's a
it's a shock to the income. Okay.
Okay. All right.
To the labor income, to labor income. It's a shock on wages. So then we repeat the same exercise. We increase the fixed cost in order to reproduce the entire increase in the markup that we see in the data. This is fake. This is not. We don't think, even if we think that the increase in fixed cost is important, and I'm going to try to convince you in a moment, but we don't think that the entire markup has been, increase in markup can be pinned down by that. But this is just the exercise we do. And again, you see the same effect. Growth goes down. So this is essentially from the 1980 value to 2020 value. Gini goes up quite a bit. Top 10 share quite a bit. And the real rate goes down. And R minus G goes up only very little. Then you can come to me and say, oh, why is that? A small increase in R minus G generates a large increase in inequality. Okay, so this is the insight. So imagine that you are in the rep agent model. R minus G equal to rho. Okay? So if you perturbate that model a little bit, and you, in steady state, you push R minus G over rho, what happens to wealth? Boom, explodes. Okay? So these models are very sensitive to those changes. Okay, so that's why you see that. It's not a case that is the case. It's not the case that is the case. The story is identical. So I have 10 minutes. I'm not going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat it fast. Market power, okay? The relationship between market power and growth is again via spillover. The relationship between market power and the interest rate operates via the asset market. The only difference with a simple model is that now you have this, right? Now you have the because it's not a rep agent model, the asset supply is upward sloping. Okay? So R minus G, even if by very little, must increase. In steady state, we haven't computed the transition of the complicated model. We'll have to, I think, at some point, but no now. Okay. Now, R goes down because of the growth interest rate feedback, okay, that I explained. And it's important because we do see in this period a reduction in the real rate, okay? Now, this is what we were discussing before. Why don't we observe a proportional shift? You know, there is a net increase in net returns of savings, net of growth. Why me, Pietro, and Angus don't stay at the same level of wealth? We can show that wealth increases for everybody, okay? But also we show that dispersion increases. So this is the distribution before and after the shock, the market power shock, for inpatient, medium patients, and patient individual. They all move to the right, but inequality increases. The reason why inequality increases is because we don't all save in the same way. Our reaction is not the same. And this is showing it. So this is the policy function for savings. The thickness tells you what is the frequency of the distribution at that level of asset. So this is the baseline, and this is the shocked one after the increase in market power. Okay, the upward shift in the saving function is stronger for the rich than for the poor. And you can also see here we plot the changing in savings. Okay, the mechanism is that poor save for precautionary reasons. Risk hasn't really moved here. Okay? You know, the variance of the shock hasn't changed, so they don't react much. The rich react much more, and inequality pulls apart. So this is, by the way, this. When I saw it, I said, okay, well, this should be super well known in the literature. It's not. Okay, so the fact that there is an heterogeneous response to interest rate shocks across the wealth distribution was not well established. People were using it. I talked to Gianluca Violante about this. Like, they were using it, but they didn't understand that it was a systematic feature of this class of models. Now, to conclude, and then we can talk a bit more because I talk too much. So we're going to do something that I don't like to do, but we probably have to do some work on this. But it's always indicative, okay? We're going to do welfare analysis in steady state. So this shows you what happens to the welfare of different people in the asset distribution when we shock the economy with the increase in fixed costs that generate the entire increase in markups observed in the data. Growth goes down, and wealth inequality goes up. And this is striking. So that's why probably there is some more work that we want to do here. So the bottom 80% loses 33% of long-run consumption. There are substantial losses until you start, the losses turn into gains around the top 0.5%. And the large gains are concentrated at the very, very, very top. Okay? So essentially, the more you depend on labor, the more you are negatively affected, not only because statically profits increase and wages go down, but also the growth rate of wages has gone down. Okay, and because of the borrowing constraint, you can't enjoy neither permanent nor long-run increase in the net return on savings. Now, just to conclude, although again, this is mostly, we call it an applied theory paper, so we haven't done a lot of work with data, but I'm gonna show you some indirect evidence. It's very difficult to measure fixed cost. Indirect evidence on suggestive. It's not. So this is the aggregate burden of federal paperwork regulation, both in terms of number of hours to prepare and file the paperwork, and share of total working hours. Essentially, has doubled in the period we consider. Okay, and there is some work on this. There is also a paper by John Cedar, actually, some years ago, a friend of many of you guys. And then this is pretty cool. Stock market valuation as a share of GDP. You know what's this? This is called the Buffett index. It goes from 40% to 200%. And this is exactly fine my free entry condition. This is the present discounted value of the firm in our model economy, which maps, I can use this to back out the increase in phi very easily. And probably is an exercise. We could also use the other one, but this is perfect. It's indirect, obviously, inference, indirect evidence, if you want to call it evidence. But probably the exercise that is worth doing is taking the increase in entry costs from here, and then compute how much of the increase in a markup, reduction in growth, and increase in wealth this mechanism can account for. At the moment, I just did quantitative theory, right? No, not much measurement. So I've done, Ufuk and Sina, they don't talk about wealth, but they look at this increasing concentration. And essentially, they take a step-by-step model, which is a version of our Roman economy model. Is in closed economy, they put limit pricing to generate endogenous markups. Nothing works. They try a lot of things, and they end up with slower knowledge diffusion. Right? It was the only change in the parameter that worked. They have many more factors. They worked in generating reduction, in the reduction so increasing market concentration, increasing markups. They don't do productivity slowdown because the model cannot match it, actually. So then they take it exogenously. Our insight is that actually the knowledge diffusion slowdown can act, instead of causing market power, increasing market power, can be a consequence of market power if you endogenize it. Okay. This is potentially also consistent with what Liu et al. Do in their paper. They just reduce the interest rate exogenously, and they show that in a step-by-step model gives you more market concentration. We showed it's actually market concentration that is compatible, that can generate increasing market concentration, can generate a reduction in interest rate. So yeah, we start from facts on market power, growth, and inequality. And my original idea was, before the facts, was like, okay, what is growth going to do in these very popular setups to study wealth inequality? So then we nested endogenous growth model into an otherwise standard incomplete market model. And we show that, that wealth inequality depend on the return gap, and we know, and higher markups have an impact through the asset market on this return gap. And what generates wealth inequality, increased wealth inequality, is the heterogeneous household response to changes in the return gap. Okay, so lower growth, then we have this nice feedback that gives me more inequality with lower interest rate. The welfare implications are amazing, striking. We need to do some more work. And it opens up also a bunch of policy implications on not only on the for policymakers to go for antitrust, to focus not only on static distortion but also on dynamic distortions, but also on on the broader social implications in terms of distribution and inequality of competition policy. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask a question or make a suggestion. First, I just want to say I think it's a really nice paper. I think you highlight the mechanism particularly well, and speaking for myself, but probably for most everybody else in the room. This sort of story on connecting the wealth inequality to the rising concentration makes perfect sense to me. But using the borrowing constraints, and focusing on the US, it occurred to me that perhaps you could highlight your story a little bit more strongly by looking at the differences in the measured level of borrowing constraints across countries and the differences in changes in the entry barriers. So maybe all of this increase in concentration is purely driven by the tech titans, it's purely international, and that's all the same. But the degree of borrowing constraints, I could be wrong. I haven't looked at this too carefully, but it seems to me in the US it's probably more severe than it is in other places. So if that's the case, there should be some variation in terms of, how the wealth inequality changed in response to any changes in the entry costs across the countries. The other part of this, and going back to the slide you mentioned with like John's paper on entry costs, is that while, these regulatory costs, may have risen and the bureaucratic paperwork and red tape rose in the US, it's probably the opposite in many other countries. So you go back 20, 25 years when there was a big literature on how easy is it to be an entrepreneur? How easy is it to set up and start a new firm? And 25 years ago, it was shown that the US was relatively easy compared to other places. And in the last 25 years, countries have actively worked to reduce that cost. So in some sense, the entry barriers have dropped in a lot of other countries. And this kind of extra variation, along with the variation in borrowing constraints, and this comes back to some extent to Angus's question about, the story could go either way. I would like to suggest you maybe put a little bit of time into looking at that, because I think this might help you tease out that story a little bit further, because those borrowing constraints are critical for your story, if I'm not mistaken. If you take those out, there's no story here. So sorry, just want to get that thought out there.
Okay, I'll collect a few questions because maybe there's going to be similar questions. And Angus?
Well, it's a nice paper. I do have some comments. I mean, your quantitative part is really well done. I mean, it matches the data really well. But you have a relatively simple model to begin with just the capitalists and the workers. I would like to see a bit more analytical result, which you should be able to do. At the moment, all you have shown is that the growth effect is ambiguous, that we know. But can you give us the conditions under which the growth effect is positive, and then what happened to wealth inequality? And can you give us the condition under which the growth effect is negative, and then what happened to wealth inequality? And you should be able to do that because the model is relatively simple. It's like a representative agent model, right? And then the wealth inequality is all determined by the wealth to wage ratio. So it should be relatively doable. I guess the complication arises because you have an open loop equilibrium. You want to endogenize the markup. So the markup is a function of the number of firms, and then you solve this open loop, which makes things difficult. Why do we do that? There are other ways to endogenize the markup, right? Would a model with a different mechanism for the endogenous markup give different results? Okay, so those are my questions. Yeah, all right.
Thank you. Guido?
Great paper, I like it. Maybe you can, I share some concerns about the increase in entry barriers in the 80s, because it was, as I mentioned before, it was also a period of high deregulation in the United States. So it could be mixed. However, my opinion, a strong argument would be the increase in patents, Bayh-Dole Act, Federal Circuit, and so on. There was a paper of mine with Galli on the Journal of Economic Growth on blocking patents, 2018, where we get something similar. So where there was basic and applied research, and the basic researchers got more power, so got a higher share. And that would imply a decline in innovation, could imply, if high enough, a decline in innovation, and an increase in the stock market valuation, and an increase in functional inequality. But we don't study personal inequality, which I think is the real strength of this paper. So in this case, I think the two papers are a bit complementary, but your paper goes further on the consumer side and household side.
Okay. Is there other question? Pietro, you need to ask a question. It's mandatory.
How are you?
Oh,
That's my question.
or even a complaint, a comment, a complaint.
No. I think that you can be more generous to the literature that predates the recent discussion. It can only help the paper in terms of aiding the readers to see the big picture better. And the other thing is that you might end up drawing referees that are from this crowd as opposed to the other crowd. But the mechanism, I think it's something that we have clarified. Set aside the inequality question for the moment. The market structure, number of firms, growth, nexus, that's something that we have clarified a long time ago. The novelty here is that you are using that mechanism to connect it to wealth inequality, and there is this big component that comes from the asset market. That's where the question that Chris was asking earlier plays an important role. One thing, and this goes to Constantine's question, I didn't interject at the time, but seems right now is the right time to say. There is evidence that the number of firms is increasing, the aggregate total number of firms. So any story that hinges on a reduction in the number of firms runs into this tension. What we need is a model where you can accommodate a growing number of firms in the aggregate and a shrinking number of firms within the industry. And that probably must be a model where there is an endogenous number of industries.
Yeah, so that is, yeah, I can answer, yeah.
And we know how to write these models now. There are several around. So that's something that addresses that point.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, I'll start from the bottom. Can you send me short emails with what you mean with the first point, the previous literature and with citations, etc. And then the second part, that's easy to do. So we can do the model with an endogenous number of industries, and it will complicate a bit, but it's going to be an industry shakeout, especially if the industry are heterogeneous. You're going to get some sort of selection of the less productive industries, and you're going to get a shakeout. We can do that. I need to look at the evidence more precisely to see, because I need to understand how this. So the number of industries is indeterminate in this model, right? While this is a story of within industry reduction in the number of firms.
Correct.
So it's still consistent with the evidence, but actually it doesn't.
If you look at census data,
if
you look at census data for the US or the small business administration, that any data set is going to tell you that the number of firms or establishment, those measures, that growth rate is very similar to the growth rate of the population. It's very hard to reject the hypothesis that, statistically speaking, that the number of firms grows with the size of the labor force. So to get the number of firms goes down in individual industries, that I can think of another mechanism that either that or
no, but it is consistent. I mean, I don't have a paper that can tell me since the global number of industries is fixed. I don't have the model cannot tackle that question. But if
Correct.
the evidence is that within industry, because otherwise you're not going to get concentration, right? The evidence is within industry, you have increased the number of, you have reduced the number of firms. Then we have that. But I'll have to think, if it's, I will look at the data a bit more carefully. And this is actually a good point that we should we should mention at least and discuss.
The only alternative is that you work with a model where your markup is not a function of the number of firms, but of the number of firms divided by the size of the population, some measure like that. And then you can have that the period, you have a period of entry below the growth rate of the population. And so that drives down that ratio between number of firms and population, and you can get that. Soroush's job market paper from 3-4 years ago, no more, had that kind of model. And in that paper, he also has evidence, very good evidence, that for the hump-shape relationship between innovation and number of firms, concentration, the same hump-shape relationship that you're talking about in the paper. And the thing is that he managed to reproduce that kind of result across many industries using modern econometric techniques. So using an instrument is not the correlation reported in the old market structure innovation literature. I'm yelling at him
I will
time
check.
that he hasn't published the paper yet because I don't know what the hell he's doing. But so I will look at the paper, and
I will
you
see
probably
the
remember
paper.
it from the market back then.
Yeah, we interviewed him and he had a fly out in Nottingham, so I should know the paper.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
And excuse me, a final point. That paper also has a very good literature review on my point about the references. So if you can go to his paper and
just to make sure I cite you profusely.
Mhm.
Okay, so Guido. No, I think there is. I think entry cost can be a lot of things, right? Can be a lot of things, and this is for once. I think we wrote a very elegant model for once because it's not my, as you know me. This is a very elegant model. So step toward reality can be introduced. Now, if the entry barrier are completely senseless, it would be a problem, right? But I think that the two things that I motivate, right, can be, they sort of support the question. Now, this would be important only for the application. In terms of the mechanism, I hope I have convinced you that the mechanism is, and I agree with Pietro, this is mostly about, the way we do competition growth is super clean. And I think it can be useful, for other people to take the model and do other stuff. But the inequality part is the contribution, the link between market power and growth and inequality, and that's what we want to highlight. But I think that since you all asked these questions about the entry barriers, I will have to do some thinking, also in the way to explain and to sell. And I think with part of those. So you remember the competition policy in those years started to be bit more lax in US, no?
Yeah.
There is this story by the entire book by Thomas Filipponi is about this, and then he said, look, in Europe is different because competition policy was more much more stringent. Well, I have to look at your paper with Silvia. I have to look it again because I forgot.
Yeah, because the point about competition policy, markups, and so on will go in the direction more growth. So you really need the barriers. So this is why I think you could strengthen.
No, because in your Schumpeterian mind that happens, but in this economy, the concentration will give you is a different market structure. Concentration, if the spillover mechanism is very strong, will give you less growth.
Yeah, but if you had no increase, if you had no increase in the barrier, in the entry barriers, and only an increase in the markups, I guess there would be more research and development and innovation and growth. Or
I don't know. I don't know.
Your model. I mean, I had to read your model, but my guess is this.
Well, so these models, in these models, innovation is not necessarily proportional to profits. They work differently.
Yeah, but you have an equation with V equal to phi, and if V increases and phi doesn't increase, then you will have more innovation. If I understand it correctly, maybe I missed some details, but
no, the growth equation is this one. Let's see if I have the growth equation, but then it's steady state. When in general equilibrium, this is also solved. But it's L and N. Here, it's very much like in Pietro's early papers, the oligopoly, the Bertrand oligopolistic paper. It's L and N. Okay, so I don't know. I can prove what I can do to check your story. I tweak alpha, right? And then I see what happens to N and the rest. I can do that check, yeah.
Because I really think that you need the phi to increase. But that's because it's true that the equation is fine, but there is capital R in that equation. If you go back to the system before, you have G, and phi reappears in equation 2, and that.
No, but it's going to look in steady state. It looks identical. I said here you're going to end up with in the Rep-Agent model you're going to end up with rho minus rho plus delta.
Okay.
One thing that you can do to help readers see the point that Guido is making is that in steady state you can reduce the representation of the equilibrium as the intersection of two loci in the space of growth rate and number of firms. And then you can show explicitly the comparative statics when you change a parameter.
Okay, this
going back to the stuff that I did when I was young. I think that's the best way to address Guido's question, because then you see two things. Number one, that you cannot think of of a single equation. You need to look at the intersection of two loci. And then you see that because the growth equation is going to be M-shaped in the number of firms, the comparative statics effect of something that changes the steady state number of firms depends on whether you are to the left or the right of the peak.
Yeah. So okay.
And sorry, and this is the big version of the model, right? Not the simple one.
No, this is the simple version. But
because the single version, the steady state is not going to matter. I heard.
No, for growth it matters.
Okay.
For inequality.
Okay. But anyway, if phi stays constant and you still can get the same result, that would be.
No, I think I don't think it's. Phi is important, and probably we could do a bit of a better work in motivating the increase in phi. I think, I think my main message, I mean, especially to this audience, is like, if this result that growth gives you more wealth inequality with the reduction in the interest rate is pretty powerful. Because when I present this to a different audience that don't particularly like endogenous growth, they say, well, what's the point? We haven't done it because you can plug in an exogenous interest rate, which is what Bemol and other people do. He didn't say that. So that is the main message, the theoretical message. Where do the increase in market power come from? It's an open question. I think this is one way to show it. It's not completely crazy. I need to think a bit more about what happened in the 80s, because you had some arguments and I need to think a bit more carefully about it. I want to have stronger counter arguments, but I can think, the first thing I think of is globalization. I can do an open economy version of this, and it's possible. I have a paper with that market structure, with static innovation choice, the JIE with Omar Pontus, where we show that trade liberalization can increase markups. Okay, it can be merger, can be IPR policy. So it's so there's a lot of other probably papers to be written. But my interest was the interaction between the market power and inequality, and growth is there because I think it needs to be there to explain inequality. That was the point I was making. I mean, I'm sure that there are other explanations and better than this, probably, for the productivity slowdown. More technological, as Guido is saying. No, it's this story, for example, that you have this first mover advantage, and then you start protecting your market power legally. Yeah? It's also it's probably better than this, or more micro-funded. But anyway, let me answer to all questions. So, Angus, I don't know if a different model to endogenize markups would change the result. I haven't done it. So at the beginning, I thought, why don't I write a Schumpeterian model? And then I changed the CS parameter. Okay? Then all these feedbacks are gone. The feedbacks are gone. And this is also part of the story that Pietro often told in the first early papers of the growth market structure feedbacks.
What did you
I
mean?
agree. That would be interesting it's also to see, and this is also commented by Pietro, why don't you just do more analytically and try to see what are the cases where growth goes up, growth goes down? Yeah, I could think about it. I don't know. Now I need to decide. I want to do something a bit more, because we got rejected by Econometrica with three very nice reports. In the sense of you need to do a bit more.
Sorry, can I just ask what
And
makes
so
the
a bit more, sorry, just for you, I think it could be useful. A bit more is they want way more quantification. A more complicated income shock because we have only high and low. It's not going to change anything, but it's going to make more bells and whistles. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah.
So can you help me understand what makes the analytical results so difficult to get? I mean, this is almost like a represented agent model, right? I mean, for the simple case. So why is the analytical result so difficult?
No,
Is it
no. I
because
mean,
or because of
no. I mean, there is this thing that the free entry makes things more complicated. Okay, so because N is endogenous, and so, but I think what I could do, this exercise that Guido is saying, that you're saying, I could do that.
So one more suggestion. One more suggestions. Perhaps you can look at special cases, right? If we shut down the spillover effect, then we know that we have only positive effect from the entry cost to the growth rate, right? If we shut down spillovers, beta equal to 0, then you are left with the positive effect.
That is already there. I mean, if beta this is a sufficient condition. So 0, yeah, but I was like, this is the sufficient condition. I can do the other. I can do that.
You cannot do beta equal to 0 because if you set beta equal to 0, then the model blows up because one-third tries to take over the entire economy.
You can do very small beta. It's true.
No.
And you don't have any.
Yeah, the reason is that I just want to see some analytical result, not just on the growth rate, but also on wealth inequality as well. I look at your paper. You don't have any analytical result on inequality. Am I correct? Am I understanding your paper correctly?
No, I have on the wealth to wage ratio, yes. So this condition is sufficient for an increase in entry cost to also increase the wealth to wage ratio.
And this is a summary statistic for once you know this ratio, you know what happened to wealth inequality.
I don't get anything in close form. I have this is analytical comparative statics. It's not that I get everything in closed form. It's not easy to get things in closed form here, because of the free entry condition. But you can do more comparative studies. I agree with you. The question is it worth it or not? So far, I think, all these comments about the data is probably worth looking at, because it is, it's like say, oh, you show pictures, then you need to convince us that this is the right mechanism for the picture. So I think we have stories. We have stories on the entry cost. I gave you two. I mean, what happens to the Buffett index is beautiful, I think, because you can tell me that the core mechanism is the free entry condition. And you look at that data, fits perfectly. So this kind of thing is nice. But let me finish so there was the first two questions focusing on Europe. And this was also a regulatory cost have dropped in other countries. And Guido was also asking me about this. Yeah, I don't, I told you what I think about it. So it's, we can decide whether we want to make a stronger case for entry barriers. It's not, I don't want, it's tricky because the application is also important, right? It's not just the theory, but yes, I'll try to think a bit more about adding a discussion on entry barrier besides those two. So those two graphs that you've seen, regulatory cost and the Buffett index, we don't have it in the paper. We're going to add them. Now, borrowing constraints are fundamental. Somebody asked at the beginning. No. So I can write this model, Angus, if you're interested, actually. If you take Blanchard, perpetual youth model, you can, and so that is a model. It's a silly model in a way, right? But it is a model that gives you the wealth distribution in closed form. So you don't have to assume workers capitalists. You assume that everything, they're infinitively lived, they die at the delta rate. Okay, so then you're older, I'm younger, you're going to be richer than me. That's the model. Okay, in the model, wealth distribution is Pareto, and the shape is proportional to R minus G. And there is no borrowing constraint there, and things will follow. So so that I really don't need borrowing constraint. That's it. I think I don't have any other thing to add. But anyway, so I also have to thank Guido and Angus. They don't know, but I start thinking about this kind of question, reading their very elegant papers. Those are really elegant papers. And I thought, okay, so why don't we connect this with this gigantic literature that I've never thought about? One thing in those papers by Guido and Angus, that I really liked, and I tried to understand whether it works here as well. So, okay, inequality has increased. The big political question is this fair or not? Because I talk a lot about savings. Now, be careful. Savings here is not that. It's a choice, but it's state dependent, right? In the capitalist and workers models, I'm screwed up. I cannot even save, which is the case for many families in the world. In the Iagari model, there's also a screw up area, right? Where I'm too scared, I'm too worried about my year-to-year survival to jump on the stock market because I'm constrained. So, but at the same time, in your papers, there is this story. Okay, is this stock market value effect, okay, or is the interest rate? Because if it's the stock market value effect, it's a pure rent. Okay, so now we want to try to do this decomposition to see whether that's true or not, whether there is actually, because my sense, when you look at the transitional dynamics of the simple model, is that if R minus G doesn't move, you're not going to get a big increase in inequality. But if your story is true, it's really cool because you can decompose these welfare losses in capital gains that we can decide that they are unfair. Now, so depending where they come from, but if they come from more rents because of entry barriers, there's going to be unfair and a distortion. And you saved and you deserve your money. Right? So that's something that I liked in those papers. I need to try to understand whether and to what extent it's true, but it is an important point. Yeah. And I have to revise the citations. Yeah, I have to revise it. You're right.
And Giammario, can I ask you something on the calibration?
Yes.
Because yes, you have the spillover parameter beta that is 0.77. So you take this value from blue metal.
Yeah.
Right? But I think in your case, in your models, I mean, this parameter should measure spillover. I mean, the elasticity with respect to market structure, right? Instead, in this study, in Bloom, for instance, but also Peters, I think they have a similar value.
Yeah.
I mean, this parameter would measure the intensity of spillover at a given point in time, no? So,
but across, this is the regressions are time industry. So it's across industry between firms. Sorry, between industry across firms.
Okay.
How much you learn from other firms. So it is, the mapping is not crazy. We need, as you can see, Di Pietro Angus asked me a question. So beta is not 1 here, like in the simple model, but it's quite high. And in the simulations, when beta is lower, growth goes up. So it's there, and it's the result is there.
But do you have a table with a different value of beta?
No, we haven't done this kind of thing. I mean, look, if we end up doing now we went back working it because we want to do a bit more bells and whistles and some clarifications that the list is getting longer. We're going to do this sort of robustness if we do proper quantitative analysis, which means, okay, we try to get a measure of fixed cost, which is plausible enough. And then we want to do how much this shock contributes to increasing markups and blah, blah, blah. But
Giammario, sorry, I don't know why I'm allergic to the word fixed cost.
Entry cost.
Yes, or sunk cost. Because these costs are incurred only at the time of entry. They do not repeat. So I
agree. I'm sorry. Also,
no worries.
It was nice enough not to jump on me. You're right. I apologize. No, you're right. So there's going to be this type of exercise. But so one question in general, what's your feeling? Besides Pietro, I know the answer. Because the step-by-step models are quite difficult to use. No, because I remember when we presented our paper to the trade crowd, nobody was buying this duopoly setup, right? So then the trick is that we introduce entry, right? But entry replaces always one firm on the market, so it's always 2.
Sorry, what trade crowd you were referring to?
When I had this paper with Ufuk on the step-by-step model,
okay.
In open economy, when we went to the MBR, this kind of crowd, they were like, saying, this is a very special market structure. Okay, where so essentially it's duopoly without entry, then you have free entry. But this framework here accommodates entry quite well. Okay, it is true that we're ignoring the fact that the number of firms is discrete. We just the number of firms. Some people are obsessed about this, but you can just it's just a few lines of code more. Like the model becomes uglier, but you can do that. So I mean, I found that a bit more elegant, probably. Obviously, there is no heterogeneity. With heterogeneity, everything gets more complicated, especially if you want to add heterogeneity vertically. Not that these are like asymmetric or no. But in terms of the beauty of the results, it's and also the tractability, because the model it's not the full model is not a simple model, because you need to solve Iagari with endogenous growth and in continuous time, which is it's not. But yeah, okay. It's thank you guys. This was exciting, and I wasn't expecting all these friends.
Well, friends can surprise you, can always surprise.
Guido, I sent him an email a week ago, but I was worried. I always get worried when I don't hear from Guido.
That's the spirit of this online seminar. The audience varies depending on various things, because the ambition is to span the globe, and some people cannot make it. For example, Domenico can never make it because it's in Arizona. It would be 5 in the morning.
And that's right.
But spread the word, and feel free to invite Pontus or other people, Omar, to join the group. And
Yeah.
we want to
Now
create a community of people that can discuss these things regardless of geographical constraints.
And are we going to do the Rome conference next year? Is that so? Do you remember we start talking about this at some point?
Carmelo is not here today. He told me